gracias, Rosaura, Desiree, being here. Um, in, it's this next conversation we're gonna have. It's these are conversations that have kind of been going on, in separate, I think, times of like life, right? Where disconnection and discord happen between communities or cultures. Um, and for me, this has been a very key element of conversation, internal conversation, right? And I think that's why, um, these coming up questions uh, for this conversation are going to be like very critical for us to think about, because and conversate amongst each other, because the reality is like, well, when's the last time we really conversated about our cultural identity or reconnecting to our indigeneity? Um, and I'm gonna pose this question, start off this conversation with, when you hear indigeneity, or cultural identity, what are your first thoughts or reactions, right? For me, it's sometimes I hear cultural identity and I think, feathers and Aztec dancers and all these like these videos, that I've seen, throughout the years, throughout my upbringing. Um, but now that I'm older, right, and a little more aware of like the disparities, the history, I really, when I hear about this, right, it's like I really think about resistance and resiliency, right? I think about, disconnection también, or disconnection even from my grandparents. I wasn't around them that much, uh, but I knew they existed. And rest in power. They passed away a few years back. Um, but my first thoughts is like, what is it? Where do I come from? Right? How was it? How did they live before? Right? What was their like ideals, their values, how their upbringing, the work ethic, um, and for me, again, it's one of those conversations that are going to challenge, or is going to, it challenges my upbringing, right? My beliefs, with the culture that I grew up with, being a Mexicano. It really puts a lot of things into question, right? Into it provides new perspectives, and even having conversations with my own parents, sometimes that dialogue becomes like, I feel like I'm challenging them. I'm challenging their beliefs and what they think is like correct or incorrect, um, and really thinking about, well, is that colonization speaking, thinking, right? Treatment, all that stuff, right? And all these things come into play, but um, my initial reaction is always like, I always get taken aback a little bit, because it's just it's a crucial conversation when we're talking about and thinking about, like, who are we, where do we come from, you know but you guys have any thoughts, reactions to that?
Yes, definitely. Okay, Bernie. Well, for myself, first and foremost, I wanted to acknowledge the land that we're on. So the Estland Costa Nation, acknowledging that we're on that land, and especially when we're talking about indigeneity and realizing that, man, this is what it is. We're on their land, right? Or I'm on my land. So what comes up for me when I hear indigeneity and culture? I feel like for myself, more questions than answers. Um, I'd say I don't think I was really kind of given that knowledge to know really. You see things on TV and you read about a lot of things, but actually knowing the truth, probably not. So, like I said, probably more questions than answers when it comes to that. But definitely for myself, speaking for myself, and just knowing my roots and where I come from, um, is what comes up the most. So I am part of the local tribe here, the Selenian tribe, by a very small percentage, but definitely acknowledging that as well, and knowing where I come from. So indigeneity for me is just like, hey, it's in my blood, man. I'll go ahead and pass it to you, Rosaura. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, shout out to both of you. Welcome to all our guests. I will say thank you, Des, for saying that. I'm in Hayward, so I just want to acknowledge the Ohlone people. This is their territory, their land. And so for myself, when thinking about indigeneity, I think that for a long time I didn't consider myself indigenous, and I'm still in that identity type of crisis, right? Because it feels like I always seen myself as like Mexican, and then it was like Mexican American, and then Chicana, and then I started working at Milpa in March of last year, and slowly it's been a process of like, what does it mean to be Indigenous? What does it mean to dig into your roots and your culture? And so for myself, I always saw it as the other. It was like a culture that I would see, like, I think of like feathers or Mexica dancing, or but it wasn't something that felt like it was mine, right? But then when I start looking into like my own family history, it's you could see it like like my dad is like has indigenous features, right? Whereas like my mom is more European, like fair skinned, right? So it's just interesting to see that. And then when looking at my grandma, she also has very indigenous features. When looking at her father, I've only seen a picture of him, but my mom has said that he was very tall, very like he just his face, like his features were very indigenous, indio, como le dicen, right? And so it's one of those things where it's in our blood, but sometimes we don't recognize or realize that, oh yes, I am indigenous and this is where I come from, right? And so for me, this is a interesting topic that I appreciate both of you for like for like that we're having this conversation, but I think at times like it's a tough one for me, right? Because like I'm still very much, like learning about my own indigenous roots, so it could be rough for me sometimes, and it's weird. It's like weird to be in that place of like trying to figure it out. And so I just appreciate the question, but that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, and gracias for making that point. The features, right? Our parents' features, and that just brings, it brings something up to my thought, right? Where when I met my grandma, my great grandma, right, Doña Maria, um, she was 104 years old, right? Bien morenita, chaparrita, like short, just old, it's just like when you when I think about old, I think about my great grandma because it was like her skin was really tight, but that senora, she walked around with her cane, smoking her cigarrito and her tiquelita, right? And didn't speak no Spanish or English. She was all native tongue from Zacatecas, right? Uh, and I mean, she was just strong, right? And is this is kind of like a follow up question, right? To the is this something that we've ever thought about? That I ever thought about? Um, you know, being locked up, right? We get a lot of free time, right, to do a lot of reading and stuff. And one of those things is that you start, you go in phases, right? You read, urban books and murder mysteries and all these things, right? But then you start just slowly getting into um, cultural readings, the Aztecas, the Mexican American War history, right? You start getting into it, and I think it's just part of our DNA that we so much resonate with what we read because it's like it's familiar, somehow, somewhere, you know, I feel like my body or my thoughts, right? It's like they recognize these words or they recognize this hymn, right? Or this instrument, and it's it becomes intriguing, for me. So being in there, that was something that kept me really kind of kept me motivated and focused, and I and it really put the that spark right inside me to like really think about like, well, like I said earlier, like quién soy, You know, where do my parents come from? I know that they come from Sonora, you know, San Luis Colorado, and my pops comes from Hermosillo, Sonora, right? But what, you know, recently I've really been thinking about like, well, where did they come from? You know, what is that? Where is that lineage coming from? Um, and it's my point of view that if I if I find out where I came from, you know, what's my lineage? What's the history then, right? what was a what was a culture like? What was their upbringings? You know, their teachings, their lessons. You know, their hardships. Um, that I will be able to develop a better sense of like belonging. You know, a better sense of development of where I want to go, what I do not want to do anymore. You know, um, understanding um, like our folks. You know, we've been interrupted from our culture. You know, through colonization, through the tip of a sword, and the tip of at the end of a bullet, right? Um, and all these things, you know, it's like it really challenges me because I think about like all the things that I've done, and it's like, well, was I the one doing them, right? Was that me actually doing them, or was I was just living my circumstances and conditions and tried to like do the best I could. Um, but again, this is something that I think about, you know, every day. You know, when I look at my jefita, you know, um, the cooking, the cooking that she does, you know, the it's just so it's like genetic, you know, memory, you know, that it brightens my it brightens my spirit, you know, especially nowadays también, you know. But I think this conversation will hopefully have the you know those that are watching, you know, start thinking about it if you haven't already, but really start engaging in those questions, right? Of like, quién soy, de dónde vengo. Um, yeah.
Thank you, Bernie, for those points. I actually kind of wanted to just to your point of having an affinity for certain things that belong in your culture. So for myself, I've always had certain affinities to like smells, the sound of the drums, certain medicines that I just knew somehow were going to work at a young age. I'm like, you know, mixing some little paste of like some little plant and putting it on my little brother or sister's little scrapes and cuts and not realizing that, hey, like this is something that is so engraved in my blood that I don't even know that why I'm doing it, but it just makes sense. And it does, it brightens up your spirit knowing having that affinity for those certain types of things. And I just wanted to speak to that point, Bernie.
Yeah, Des, and I know you and I have had this conversation. I remember you bringing up the medicinas and you just knowing like, oh, like I'm gonna heal or take care of this scrape but with this plant or what have you, right? And so, and I think I might have brought up like I've been giving massages like since I was 10. Nobody taught me how to give massages. It's one of those things that it's like, you know, and I feel like that's part of our culture too. Like like indigenous culture, like us as brown people, like we're healers. We find ways to be able to take care of each other, right? So whether that's through massaging, whether that's through the use of plantas or medicinas or plática or bailando or cantando, like we find ways to be able to be resilient, right? And so I think that's something that really resonates too, is that again, like it's something that like nobody taught me or you know told me like, hey, go massage. It's one of those things where I think I just started doing that on my family, and it's like a tool that we use to be able to like take care of each other, right? And so that's one thing. And I just appreciate this conversation because again, like it brings up a lot of, it honestly is like emotional for me too, because it just ties into just like the just all of the, it ties in all of the lineages, all of the people, you know, whether we've met them or not, like our family history and being able to bridge that gap between us and them, right? Because we're an extension of them, right? Whether again, whether we've met them or not, like like we're part of that lineage, right? And so yeah, I just appreciate that this conversation for sure. And the sun's coming out, so hey, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, there you go. You know, the son's happy. You know, you know the answers are listening right now. they came out, tripped out, and like, ¿qué onda? You know, hey, and you know, this is the whole thing about this.
¿Estás platicando de mí or what?
Yeah, these whole conversations, right? When it's like sometimes it's just you're gonna sound like, or I'm gonna sound like, or people are gonna listen to like, man, what the hell is going? Like, what are they saying? You know, they make no sense. You know, but that's the whole beauty about it, that our cultura, you know, is so broad and just involves, it envelopes everything, right? That you know, our spirit, our soul, right? The you know, nature, you know, the natural occurrences in the universe and all that, you know. But then again, it's like we've been so interrupted and so disconnected, right? That we need to have these conversations to start, you know, sparking those thoughts and ideas, right? And you know, speaking, you know, theoretically, you know, philosophically, lo que sea, you know, doing some readings and research, all these things, you know. But that's, you know, that's how, we got to start somewhere. You know, we've been living in a very capitalistic society, you know, that where the norms of success, you know, really don't reflect, you know, the our community. You know, like we're always trying to live up to a certain standard, someone else's standard. Um, but that standard has been oppressing us, right? Has been, um, you know, discriminating us. Um, you know, we see all the disparities that are going on, you know, on today, and we've known this for years. But a lot of the language or thought, you know, just never was there. You know, some folks were able to like grasp that concept and that idea and that thought and develop it, right? It's kind of even thinking about a little bit of the history back, like when the Chicano movement was going on, and that in that era, the Black Panther civil rights, you know, there was a lot of empowerment going on. You know, it was a pocket of resistance. They were also looking for their cultural identity, I believe, you know, because they knew that the life that was going on, the society that was uh, dictating their life, it wasn't meant for them. It wasn't meant for us, you know. So, like, why is this important? You know, why is indigeneity important or cultural identity important? Uh, and for me, I think understanding that my life right now, what I've been experiencing, it's like it's not right. You know, it's not the treatment that I've experienced, um, the inequalities, you know, the structural inequalities that my parents have, you know, suffered through. Uh, you know, it's not that's not human. It's not something that human beings should have to like go through. You know, everyone should have um, the opportunities. You know, the resources. You know, to live a good healthy life. You know, and that's what I see. You know, that's what I see. Our ancestors, you know, had. You know, they didn't have borders. They didn't have. Um, you know, they didn't. The riches didn't really were different for them. You know, if the whole community had, you know, enough to live, you know, and survive and raise their children and family, the community was, you know, was happy. You know, it wasn't like, oh, I need to like look out for me and mine's the mas, you know, and try to, you know, just uplift myself. And nah, it was, you know, for me, things were like, I feel like things were like a lot different. Obviously they were, you know. And we see a big wave of folks going back to the old traditions, the old values, even, you know, through the rites of passage. You know, we, you know, in the movement también, we talk a lot about healing and consciousness, you know, and cultura. And you know, and every step of the way we have resistance, you know, from the system. You know, so that to me means like, well, I'm doing something right because I'm getting resistance from the system. So that means that, you know, I got to continue doing what I'm doing, learning what I got to learn. You know, they, you know, and this is the whole, you know, the whole thing about colonization. Um, that if they give us if the system gives us, you know, the resources needed for our families to, you know, come out of poverty, um, have successful pathways to like home ownership, um, proper education, uh, health, all that stuff, right? Then they'll lose that power and control over us, you know? So I think this is important, because we need to, we need to be able to live our own lives the way we feel, you know, we should, uh, we should live them, and I think our culture would be, the teachings of our culture would really, uh, or actually they already give us like the pathways of like what's a healthy, transition into adulthood, right? What's a healthy adult? What does it mean to be an elder, right? This whole cycle of life, right? From childhood to all the way to elderhood. Um, but again, there's just so much stuff that we don't know. So many questions that we have, uh, but yet there's such little access to this information from elders, right? Because again, we might have to you know, go down to Mexico or to some of the reservations and develop these relationships and just try to figure it out. But everything costs money. Everything costs, everything's, time, and we gotta continue to like try to live in this society, while we're trying to decolonize. Um, and yeah, I mean, I'm a open up the floor to you también, because I'm just thinking right now is like my train of thought is just everywhere trying to get everything inside my head out, and it's yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bernie, for your very valid points. Um, as you had mentioned before, whether people consciously or unconsciously know it, we are already in this process of decolonization, a very long struggle of decolonization. I feel like knowing who you are and your indigenous roots is important to me because you have to know who you are in order to know what your next step's going to be, where you're going. If you don't know that, then it's going to be really hard in order to figure out what the right pathway is. So yeah, basically, essentially, that's what it is just knowing who you are to know where you're going to go.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm actually reading this book called La Chicana, which I actually took from the Milpa library. But it's really interesting because it goes all the way back to like just our ancestors before colonization and whatnot. And the book specifically focuses on the role of mujeres, but it gives like a general outline first. And so it's really, really interesting to be able to read that. And so I feel that for myself, reclaiming indigeneity is really important because at some point you have to do it. You can either continue living your life thinking like, well, I'm not indigenous and rejecting that part of yourself, or you can start claiming it and saying and digging into the roots. And it's again, like it could be really difficult because you may not know what tribe you came from, or your family may not be connected. Like if both of my parents are super Catholic, my mom specifically is super Catholic. And so that is a form of colonization because Catholicism is not something that we used to practice before colonization, right? And so it's just really interesting that I grew up Catholic. At 20, I stopped going to church because it was just, there was a point where I was like, I don't think this, I'm not getting anything from this, right? And it was like a whole thing because my parents were like, oh, hell no, right? Like, then how are you going to get saved? How are you going to go into heaven, right? And so it's just interesting to go through that. But I feel like for myself, I appreciate this question because at some point, again, like you could either continue just kind of going on about your life, or you can say, wait a minute, there is a part of me that is indigenous. What does that mean, right? Because for myself, I've already, as a young child, again, I saw myself as Mexican, so I already understand that part of myself. Of course, there could always be more digging, but there's that part of myself, right? And then there's the American, I guess you could say European side that I feel like I, I've also, because it's all around us, right? It's in the music, it's in movies, it's in books, it's everywhere, it's in advertisements. Like the whiteness is just so like right there in your face, right? That it's not, I grew up with it. So I don't feel like at this point, like, oh, I need to learn more about whiteness or Europeanness or like whatever. It's like, it's already there, right? And so, and then also a third facet of that is growing up with the influence of like Black culture, right? Like I've always listened to hip hop and I've always seen Black artists. So it's like I know more about Black culture than I know about indigeneity. So it's just interesting to come to that place of like, okay, so then what does it mean for me to be Indigenous, right? So again, it's a whole process. It's not easy by any means, but I think it is really rewarding, and it is really important because at some point you have to claim your sovereignty. You have to determine like who were you before colonization, right? If that such thing exists. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, and that's a good one right there. Like, who were you before colonization, right? So someone would be like, "Well, you weren't even born yet," eh? So, like, but however, the spirit though, that spirit of our ancestors has been surviving, right? It's been hidden. It's been, we see it in the textbooks, right? Certain books, authors, there's little hints here and there from other Native American literature and stuff. There's these little things that we connect to, and if we start doing some research, um, a lot of it comes, it starts forming the like the migration that happened, from South America, Central, up north, and someone say, it's like it started from North America up here, and then it went down. So a lot of things. So it's like, well, how can this be helpful for us, right? I think if I evaluate my life up to this point, I can honestly say that for the better part of my life, acting through the notion of like, of what I'm supposed to, who I'm supposed to be, you know, uh, in the essence of like what a Mexican American supposed to be, Mexicano born here, you know, it was, it just, it, I went through so much, and I created a lot of difficulties, right, for my parents, for my community. Um, I've done harm to myself, to those around me, without even thinking about it. And as soon as I started to tap into uh, my roots, right, my indigenous roots, to the culture, to the traditions, to the healing practices, right, um, of just walking with palabra, greeting people, it's like not just being tunnel vision, or stuck on the phone or lo que sea, actually trying to show sentimientos, show appreciations for people. Um, for me, that has really helped me. I got off parole. You know, I'm healthy. Um, I don't drink or smoke. Um, I'm really trying to do the right thing. Really trying to be involved in the community, and be part of that struggle for liberation. And I can honestly say that I couldn't. I don't know if I could do it if I was still thinking thinking about things the way I was, right, before I tapped into the to this way of life. And I say a way of life because literally it has transformed the way I think, the way I live. I'm more, it's more simpler. you know I don't I don't really I don't really care much for like material acquisitions. It's like antes, all I wanted to have like pairs of shoes and a nice car with rims and all that stuff. um but now it's like I'm okay with having just the bare necessities. um and but my priority now is actually like building relationships, building a common good for my family, like that space where we can have conversations, and we can laugh, and we can eat together, and we can um, cry together. We can do all these things in together as a family, as like it is my experience that the system that I live in, it really goes out of its way to try to, it's not that tries, but it has created a wedge between what the family structure is. Everybody's so individualistic. Even we see that in families. I seen that in my family because I did it. you know uh just thought about myself for the longest time. So for me, this is like, it's really helpful because it helps me do what I can to mend that family structure and ties. um and just really try to, like, I'm really trying to make my parents, proud, trying to make myself proud also. This is why I feel like this can really help us, because we're really talking about, basic, values, of dignidad, respeto, compasión, just, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I will say there's a lot of mysticism in our cultura, and whether you believe in reincarnation or second lives or many lives, that's the beautiful thing about what our cultura has to offer is like it may not always make sense, but everything comes together in the end, right? And so I just appreciate you both sharing, and I feel like, and I mentioned earlier, this is an emotional topic because it's so personal. This is our lives, right? And like what we've gone through, and there's just been so much pain and so much like what you're talking about in terms of like a family wedge. I have felt that in my own family where like I feel so disconnected from my own brother and father and mother, and that's by design, right? Like that's done on purpose. That's like the system that was set in place when colonization came about, where like all of what the colonizers wanted was gold or labor or just exploitation from people. They didn't care about people. And so um it gets really emotional. Like when you were talking, I was like starting to tear up because it's like, fuck, dude, like I've always carried this pain in my throat right here. And it's because of that, because it's like we're still living it, right? A lot of people think like, oh, that's in the past. Like colonization happened like hace 500 años. And it's like, dude, but we're still suffering the effects of that. There's people that it's just painful, right? It's painful to see like that we've gone through pain, that we've been so detached from our culture, and so I'll say that much. But yeah, I just again like appreciate the conversation, and it gets hard. It's like really hard like to have this conversation because it's but going back to your question, sorry, like you said like why is it important, like how can we use it today? Yeah, I think just tapping into the medicine. Like I'll tell you this, like one time I went to the milpa office and there's a beautiful altar there, and there's like the gourd, and you can burn like copal and whatnot, and I was there by myself, so I was just like, I'm gonna burn some copal, right? And I took the gourd, and I can't say that I know how to play the gourd, but you can pick up a gourd and just go like this and like, okay, cool, I got a rhythm going, right? And so I was just doing that, like I was just doing that, and honestly, like, and then I started like doing this, right? Like moving my feet, like, okay, I got something going. Okay. And then I was just like talking out loud, praying, like, please help me through what I was going through something at that time. Please help me through what I'm going with what I'm going through, just continuing to move around, burning the copal. So everything came together to the point of like, I started crying, I started bawling. I was just like, oh my God. I was like, oh my God. And it felt so good to be able to engage with the medicina in that way. And that's our cultura, that we have all of these, the instrument, the smell, the scent, we have the movement, we have, the prayer, our palabra, like to be able to speak and to be able to heal. And so I just appreciate that about being able to come in and learn. And again, sometimes feeling like an imposter because like I didn't like, so again, like I'm in the learning stages, continuing to learn about like my culture identity in terms of like indigeneity, but I still appreciate the release of being able to like, let go and heal. So
Yes, thank you so much. Oh man, I definitely resonate with that as well. And being able to connect with that is just a beautiful thing. I'd say for myself, man, maybe just in some like idealistic world of mine, just thinking of the possibilities of how people can start treating each other, how people can start treating the earth, just even taking indigenous teachings for the land that we currently live on today and being able to apply them and being able to take care of what we have now and being able to have that for the next 7 generations, and being able to pass it on in a good way instead of passing them on something that they're not going to be able to maintain or handle. Um, And also an idealistic role, like I said, just being nicer to each other, applying like uh, just being humble for the most part, not thriving on like a capitalistic system where you're going to be really cutthroat with everybody so you can get what you need and want in life. And but instead kind of doing like a mutual aid type thing, like, man, brother, what do you need? Sister, what do you need? In any sense, whether you need food for your table, I could be there for you and help you because you're my brother or sister, or just with my words or with anything that I can help out with, and just being able to be there for each other. And these are the kind of teachings that Indigenous people pass on, and things that have been lost and that can be found again through the process of decolonization.
Yeah, I was just thinking right now when y'all were speaking, right? Like the impact of these type of conversations. Um, like what would it look like if like every community, right? Every community had these spaces, that, had these conversations. And what I mean about communities is like it could be from like your just family community, right? Your like your home, your the siblings or tias and tios. Because doing some readings and stuff, a lot of the indigenous teachings is like, you know, we didn't have like titles, right? The only title that we had was like uncle, tia, right, or hermanos, hermanas. It wasn't like the concept of like me wasn't really like you know available, right? It was just it was everything was about uh the the commonwealth, the common good. And you have there's a lot of experts out there, a lot of people that have been doing research and traveling, right, and recording conversations and teachings and traditions. So some of the we do have some access to some of those things through the books, and recordings and stuff. And and I'm gonna pose this last question. Is there a place for this in today's society, in today's modern society? Um, Des, you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, I can definitely kick this one off. Did you see me jumping for it? No. There is definitely a place for this in society. If anything, it's a necessity for the modern society to grasp these concepts and be able to push them, and like I said, pass them on to the next 7 generations. If we do not do this, I have more fear for us not doing it, um, and applying this into today's society and culture, and hoping and praying that it definitely gets passed on.
Yeah, I second that. Des is such a badass with saying stuff, but I don't totally agree. I feel like, yeah, we can definitely, yeah, if anything, we don't tap into these concepts enough, and that has been the issue that a lot of people have been forgetting. They're watching the TV or YouTube or whatever it is, and they're just not, or they don't even have a place where they can have these conversations, start these conversations. Luckily for myself, I was able to tap in with Milpa, but I don't know of any place in Hayward that has like a space for like, let's talk about indigenous culture, let's fight for the rights of indigenous people and their identity and whatnot. And so I think that a lot of people can benefit from the concepts of just indigenous teachings in general, because it's made a difference in my life. I feel like it's made me more mindful. It's made me pay more attention to like, wait, if I'm saying something, do I actually mean it, and am I going to follow through with it? And I think it's made me like a better daughter and a better sister. And I'm only human and I make mistakes, but I feel like I've been more mindful of like my familia, and just being able to have that more deeply, something that's more like, it's something that goes beyond myself, right? It's like something that's deeply rooted in us as a family, as a cultura. And whether my parents or my brother or the rest of my family, whether they're in touch with their indigenous roots or not, like I can still try to permeate whatever teachings that I can give, or that may come off from like my own wavelengths that people can pick up on, that I hope will be helpful.
You are so cool. You guys are so awesome, mate. Like, what I'm saying? Uh this is I mean, I like this conversation. This is, we be, recently, ever since I came on board with Milpa, right? And even, sometime even before that, right? También, I was already coming into a space where like these conversations were kind of popping up, and it's because of the readings, right? Sometimes when they say like you'll start writing, your writing or speaking, right, will reflect kind of like what you're reading, and at the time, um, that was going on. So we have conversations and like being locked up, we had some of these conversations también, because there is a lot of cultura in there también, it's just we're just locked up, we're just put away, and but when I came out and really met this the Milpa family, these strong individuals, I seen the the unity there. I seen the that everyone was trying to do the right thing. Everybody has a lived experience, um, strengths and challenges, uh, but everybody's rooted, or trying to become rooted in their identity, in their cultural, traditions and heritage. And I think in society today, we see a lot of destruction, a lot of hatred, a lot of anti-blackness, anti-brownness, anti-indigenous, and our culture in general, right, has survived this whole time. You know, pockets of resistance have popped up, uh, and you see it. You see throughout history where um, the system comes in and tries to flatline it, and it goes, and so the cultura, and this is kind of my reference, how I see, like, try to think about it, is like the cultura will go into hiding, like, oh, it wasn't time yet, the people weren't ready, you know, and I believe that nowadays, after witnessing everything that happened in 2020, that really exacerbated like a lot of people's, like, I guess I'm just gonna say, like, faith in the system, I think. um and but that does to me that doesn't mean that cultural identity is to, like, oh, we're gonna or I'm gonna stop being who I am, that I'm gonna drop everything that I've learned and become, and just, have a linear way of thinking, now, because it's like that's still, you're still exacerbating the same thing if you're gonna do that, it's like just thinking of life or a way of living in just in one way. And if I say, like, oh, I'm gonna live my life just with my identity culture, it's like, well, I'm blinding myself to all the good that all these other cultures have, um so for me, I'm gonna continue to, to try to take like the good out of other, other cultures teachings, because you can uh correlate that to our indigenous teachings and traditions, as I said, you know there's a lot of our identity missing that we need to, like, put it together, and back then, you figure, that, like, there was, pyramids in Egypt, pyramids down south, right? There was, you know certain teachings going around all across the globe, and there was, like, I really think there was that was just the way of life back then, that's, it was just simpler. um Everybody was more in tune with nature. We had no electricity, right, but we had the fire. We had no um como se dice, uh water purifiers, right, but we had some, like, some springs, like, super healthy snow melt, all that good water, um so I think, if folks are able to think about these things and, research their, the the cultural ways, it'll allow us to slow down. One of the elders, one of the uncles, he recently expressed and told me, while I was talking to him, expressing, I was like, we believe that one of the reasons why people, get sick often, is because they're such in a hurry to do everything. They stress. People start stressing out. Uh, you know, get depressed and you worry too much, and not because everything's just so fast paced, and that really resonated to me because you know I took that to heart, and like literally I try to do everything now just a little slower, just really one thing at a time, because I it it's true, for a long time it's like, man, just trying to be always in a rush, even when I'm driving sometimes. uh it's taking my time where I, when I'm on the road, and you have all these cars, just flying by, and it's like, bro, it's like this is a 25 mile zone, it's like, why are you going 40, you know? And so it's just all these things, and I think modern society, that's what it's been about, trying to move through life as fast as you can, acquire as much wealth as you can, and then try to retire, right? But the reality is that some of our families, some of our friends and community members, right, that's not an option for them. They got to work till they're 80, 90, or till they, hasta que ya no puedan, because there's no opportunities, So uh, doing this work with this concept of cultura, you know, um, it's an amazing trajectory for me, um, and just the fact that other folks are going to be watching this video, right? And give the likes. You got to put thumbs up on that thing. It's like all that stuff. Uh, but it's just this is a conversation that can take days, right? It can take hours. It can take minutes. It could never happen or happen in the future. But I believe that eventually the our own DNA will spark that thought. It's like, hey, it's time. It's gonna awaken us. So, and I guess to finish up the conversation, right? It's like, um, just want to provide a call to action, to our community members, to those that are watching. Um, so I think just because I'm still talking, I'm just gonna go ahead and just kind of segue into it. I advise those that really have thought about this, that have grandmas, grandpas, right? That you know that have lived, a long life, just have lived, are still alive. Is ask questions. It's like if you think about it, when's the last time you asked your grandma or grandpa, like, hey, ¿de dónde vienen ustedes? Or who was grandma and grandpa? Or do you remember your great grandparents? What was life? What was life like? Back then, learning these the remedios, right? The cooking, the dichos, right? All those things. It's like really, really tap into it. It's part of your heritage. It's part of our history. Um, so why not?
Yeah, thank you. I would definitely, if you're from North America, Canada, Mexico, Central America, South America, I would definitely encourage you to just think about like what does indigeneity mean to you, and like Bernie said, tap in with your family, like your parents, your tias, your tios, your grandparents. It's always good to have those platicas because first you're connecting with your own family, but also you're learning about yourself, right? And there's also a lot of readings, a lot of teachings. If there's any organization or place in your local area where you can go learn about cultura, indigenous cultura, and what that means. If there's like people that are doing Aztec dancing, I did Aztec dancing for a couple of months. Unfortunately, I didn't continue it, but I know that that was really powerful for me. Again, like when I cry, it's like a really healing experience because I don't cry that often, but it is also a source of like, okay, something's happening right here, right? And I definitely cried during one of the practices when I went to danza because it was just so powerful for me to be moving, to be hearing the music, to be like hearing the people singing. And so Aztec dancing is really, really powerful. So if there's something like that in your area that you could tap in with, I know it might be difficult right now because it's COVID, right? A lot of people are not getting together in that same way, but maybe there's something virtual that people are tapping into. And maybe like And even if that's not the case, like you could always tap in with Milpa too. Like, so I definitely encourage you to just try to seek out ways, like hit us up on our Instagram, our website. Instagram is probably the best way, right? Like I'm the one checking that. So if you DM us, I'll get it. And I'll encourage you to like email us and stuff like that. And in that way you can get tapped into the círculos, right? There's like the mujeres círculo, the men's círculos every Thursday. And so there's, I believe, a lot of resources. We're piecing everything together, right? Because that's just the reality of like indigenous culture. That's the point of us talking about this today, right? We're like piecing different things together. At least that's how it is from my standpoint of like being able to bring together information. So start with Milpa, start with like readings, right? So that's a good way to go.
Yes, thank you so much, Rosaura and Bernie, for just even having this conversation, and for everybody who's tuning into this episode as well. Just wanted to mention that we have a collective rising of consciousness, and we could really hone in on that. And it starts with these conversations. It starts with challenging beliefs, challenging certain narratives, and being able to come together with people who know what they're talking about and possibly don't even know what they're talking about, but just being able to have these conversations and learn something, and if not learn something, then to be able to pass on that knowledge. So with that being said, palabra, yeah.
And I like that, it's like at the end of the day, hey, we don't know nothing. We're just here trying to learn, trying to like, pick each other's brain. You know, it's like right here, I've heard a lot of things that it's like, oh, I like that. I like what, it's like write it down real quick and things like that, and just develop that, like you said, that, start developing that narrative, questioning the status quo, right? Questioning, is this actually right for me? Does this fit? So yeah, gracias, y'all. Again, thank both of you for having this strong and courageous conversation. Sometimes, these conversations or this topic, I think it wasn't meant to like offend anybody, to disrespect anybody, right? It's just a conversation of thought. It's like, hey, pues quién somos, de dónde venimos. Um, but yeah, gracias.
Thank you.